Speaker Johnson, you have addressed your covenant marriage in public fora, which constitutes an unusual pledge. Would you not agree?
That I definitely
Representative
take
Jasmine
issue with a
Crockett
number
inclined toward her
of
microphone as
decisions that
Mike
Donald
Johnson
Trump
sat
makes,
across
especially
from
when
her
it
at the
comes to the
witness
people that
table
he
in room
decides to appoint
2154,
to very
appearing
important
much like a
positions,
gentleman
including
dressed for
this one,
Sunday
because
services
I
who
did
had
have
found
to make
himself in a
sure that I
police
wasn't going
interrogation.
crazy. But
This, guys,
Johnson's
they're allowing it
features
because they're
set
going to
into
turn
what
him
he
into voters.
presumably considered
They
an
already are
inviting
doing this
smile
in
as
New
he
York City,
confirmed that he and
largest
his
city in
spouse
America,
Kelly
and
had
this
entered
is the
into a
plan of our
covenant
friends on
marriage
this
in
side
Louisiana.
to turn all the
It is
illegals
a
into
spiritual
voters.
bond
That's
that
it,
we
folks.
consider
you're
to be
supposed to
sacred,
believe
Johnson
that you were the
replied with a
greatest
calm
thing since
demeanor.
sliced bread. I didn't ask you a
Crockett
question.
quickly jotted
Now,
something on her pad and then
what I want to
inquired
go
about what
through is to
specifically
talk
makes this
about
bond
why
sacred.
you are a
The speaker
failure and
explained that
why,
the commitment is
honestly,
founded
we just
upon
need-
Individuals
biblical
and-
principles, meaning the
I want to ask
covenant
you a
is
question, what
ultimately
my
made before
constituents ask me.
God rather than simply serving as a
Could the
legal arrangement.
Democrats in charge, and
He
certainly
further
Democrats here with
elaborated that it
jurisdiction
demands
over the border,
mandatory
could they
premarital
really be
counseling
in
and enforces much more rigorous standards for marital fidelity, among several other specific requirements. She clarified his position, stating that it essentially involves a deep commitment to the marriage itself and to those biblical values. So it effectively becomes sacred only when it directly belongs to you, Crockett stated, raising her eyes from her notes to deliver the observation clearly. Crockett noted that this is precisely what she is hearing from his testimony. Johnson blinked several times in visible confusion while someone in the public gallery above coughed loudly in the sudden stillness. He apologized, stating clearly that he was unable to follow her exact line of reasoning or connection. Crockett offered a genuine smile, though it completely lacked any warmth or comfort, and assured him that they would certainly get there. The chairman calmer checked the official time clock, noting that Representative Crockett still had exactly 23 minutes remaining in her time. Johnson adjusted his silk tie, relying on his extensive experience with hundreds of media interviews and numerous congressional testimonies from his many years as a rank-and-file member of the House. He fully understood exactly how to manage a hostile interrogation, which involved staying calm, always acting pastoral and patient, and continually pivoting back to his core talking points, viewing this entire exchange as just another performance. Crockett softened her vocal tone and politely asked him to discuss his personal faith, noting its clear importance to his life. Johnson relaxed considerably, as this was extremely familiar territory for him to discuss openly. He stated without hesitation that his faith is the absolute foundation of everything he does in his life and work, as he was raised in a Christian household. He strongly affirmed that his personal faith directly guides every personal and professional decision he makes. You have publicly characterized yourself as a Bible-believing Christian, which is correct, she asked. You sincerely believe the Bible is the literal, infallible Word of God. He confirmed that he does believe this, leaving no room at all for interpretation because what the text says is precisely what it means. Johnson narrowed his eyes slightly because he could distinctly feel this was a sophisticated trap, yet he could not discern its exact form just yet. The Bible is explicit regarding matters of moral truth, he stated directly. Crockett nodded in agreement and listed concepts like fundamental honesty, integrity, and fidelity as examples. He agreed that it absolutely is, without question. She asked if his official oath of office to uphold the Constitution was also a solemn oath taken before God. He replied with conviction that every single oath he ever takes is taken before God. Crockett turned a single page in her organized folder and politely suggested they move to a discussion on accountability. You utilize a specific technology known as accountability software, do you not? She inquired. The unexpected inquiry hit the room with a very heavy and visible impact. Johnson's welcoming smile wavered significantly as he stammered a reply that this was entirely a private matter. She quickly countered that he had made the matter public by openly discussing it in several high-profile interviews, specifically a detailed piece with The Atlantic. She did not bother to wait for a confirmation of this fact before noting that he said he and his teenage son monitor each other's complete online activity precisely to avoid any moral temptation. She quoted him directly as saying they keep each other fully accountable and asked him to confirm if that characterization was entirely accurate. Johnson shifted slightly in his chair and said that in the broader interest of full transparency, he genuinely believes in being open about the practical tools they use to live by their stated values. She described them simply as practical tools for him to regulate his own behavior and to stay faithful to his marriage commitments. She politely suggested that without those external tools, he might be entirely unable to control his own actions. Johnson interrupted her to clarify that it is entirely about personal humility and recognizing that everyone needs support. She summarized her understanding by stating that he does not fundamentally trust himself. He replied by stating that he instead trusts God implicitly. She pressed her point, suggesting that without his own son actively watching his internet history, he might then view prohibited content or perform prohibited actions. Johnson's face was noticeably reddening as he stated with considerable respect that this entire line of questioning was extremely uncomfortable. Crockett raised her eyebrows high and reminded him that they were simply discussing the topic of accountability, which he had just claimed was critically important. A single reporter in the press gallery above typed rapidly, while the C-SPAN camera remained entirely unblinking in its focus. Johnson stated carefully and deliberately that he believes in accountability on both a personal and professional level. He quickly added that all of us in this chamber should be held to very high standards of conduct. Crockett made a detailed note and politely asked if he meant exactly like the high standards in his own covenant marriage regarding fidelity and biblical values. Crockett closed one open folder, immediately opened another, and proposed that they shift their discussion directly to Donald Trump. The comfortable atmosphere in the room grew significantly colder with the introduction of the topic. Johnson had fully anticipated this topic and had carefully prepared specific talking points about forgiveness, grace, and focusing strictly on matters of policy. He had his complete defensive armor ready for this attack. Crockett stated that he has consistently been one of President Trump's most loyal defenders in the House, and politely asked if that was an accurate characterization. He confirmed that he fully supports the president's entire policy agenda. She noted clearly that he supports much more than just the former president's policy. She pointed out that he consistently stood by him through 2 impeachments, the events of January 6th, and now his criminal trial in New York involving 34 felony convictions. She paused for a single moment to observe that this is a truly significant amount of standing by someone. He replied to her that he believes fundamentally in the legal process of due process and the presumption of innocence. She countered by stating that once a jury of one's peers finds guilt, it is no longer a presumption of innocence but an assumption of guilt. Scattered, nervous laughter moved through the public gallery above. She clarified to him that she was not asking about the legal process at all, but rather about the biblical values that he claims guide his every personal decision. Johnson tightened his jaw significantly and said that he believes very deeply in the principles of forgiveness and redemption. Crockett called that a truly beautiful sentiment, speaking in a very smooth and even voice. She politely asked which specific biblical principle covers paying hush money to an adult film star to conceal an affair while his own wife was at home with a newborn. The entire room fell completely silent following the question. Johnson refused to engage with her on the topic at all, but she insisted it was a simple question since he had claimed the Bible is clear on moral truth. She asked him which chapter and verse he specifically used when deciding to make this man the hill he would die on. Johnson firmly gripped the table and stated clearly that the president has publicly addressed those allegations and denied them. She reminded him with emphasis that the president was convicted of those actions in a court of law with actual evidence and witness testimony. Crockett leaned in closer and asked again which biblical principle guided his decision to defend a man who paid off a porn star after cheating on his own wife. Johnson replied simply that he did not think the topic was appropriate. Crockett raised her voice slightly to note that he has spent his entire career telling women what they can and cannot do with their own bodies based on his biblical principles. You have told same-sex couples they cannot legally marry based on biblical principles. You have defended extensive book bans and privacy invasions based on biblical principles. Now that I ask you to apply those same principles to your own political choices, suddenly the topic is inappropriate. Johnson opened and then closed his mouth several times before stating that the president has publicly asked for forgiveness for his past mistakes. She asked him if the president asked God or the American people for that forgiveness. She asked him if the president ever apologized to Johnson's wife, to her own constituents, or to the women he is accused of assaulting? Crockett did not bother to wait for an answer to any of those questions and pivoted to a completely different query. She asked him to seriously consider his own covenant marriage with its extremely high standards and biblical values. She asked him what would happen if Kelly discovered he had conducted an affair. He started to say that would absolutely never happen, but she quickly pressed for the hypothetical outcome. Johnson's face was now fully and visibly red as he admitted that under Louisiana covenant marriage law, adultery is indeed grounds for divorce. So your own marriage could effectively end because of biblical standards and sacred vows. He agreed that it could, but she pointed out that Trump has had 3 marriages and has publicly admitted to conducting affairs during at least 2 of them. He argued to her that those facts do not matter at all, as he is not here to judge the president's personal life. She countered him by stating, he is just here to defend him and to tell evangelical voters that he is God's chosen instrument. Crockett produced a piece of paper from her file. She quoted him from an October 2023 political rally in Georgia where he said, "God raised up Donald Trump for such a time as this." She asked if he said that, and Johnson swallowed hard before answering. He stated that he believes God can use absolutely anyone for his own purposes. She asked if that included a porn star hush-moneying, wife-cheating, felony-convicted person. He argued to her that God used many flawed people in the Bible for his purposes. She challenged him to name just one of those people who paid off a porn star. A long silence followed her challenge until someone in the gallery laughed out loud. They tried to suppress it, but another person laughed, filling the entire room with the electric feeling of barely contained chaos. Chairman Comer banged his gavel to call the committee back to order. Johnson sipped his water with a trembling hand, realizing this was going worse than he had anticipated, but believing he could recover. He studied his voice and said he understood that she wanted to make this entire matter personal. He claimed his support for the former president is based on policy and commitment to conservative principles. She mentioned his judicial appointments. Crockett's eyes lit up as she referenced the ones he praised for their deep commitment to traditional family values. He agreed with her, noting those values led them to overturn Roe v. Wade. He stated that was the correct constitutional decision based on his own reading of the document. She remarked to him that he is a constitutional originalist now. Crockett cocked her head to the side and found that interesting. She politely suggested they move to talk about the Constitution, specifically regarding the events of January 6, 2021. Johnson went very still. She noted he was there on that day, not during the actual violence, but very much present before that. He claimed he was performing his constitutional duties as a member of Congress. She asked if that is what we are calling it now in this room. Crockett pulled out a thicker folder from her file stack. She stated he organized the amicus brief to the Supreme Court attempting to overturn election results. You convinced 126 of your House Republican colleagues to sign it. You argued 4 states should have their electoral votes discarded entirely. He claimed they had legitimate concerns about significant election irregularities. She asked if he had actual evidence. He repeated they had concerns that needed addressing through legal means. Mr. Speaker, I asked for a simple yes or no regarding the evidence. He mentioned affidavits, but she noted they were thrown out of court. She emphasized that 63 cases were dismissed entirely. Trump's own attorney general said there was no fraud. His own Homeland Security director called it the most secure election in history. His own daughter said she believed Bill Barr over her father. Yet you, the Bible constitutional originalist, tried to discard the votes of millions. Johnson raised his voice slightly to say they were exercising their clear constitutional right. She asked if that right was specifically to ignore the actual Constitution. Crockett leaned back to draw a parallel. I have been reading about your covenant marriage, which is based on a sacred contract both parties must honor. I have been thinking that the Constitution is like a covenant we all swear to uphold. It is sacred. And you said every oath you take is before God. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land. So when you tried to overturn a fair election based on zero evidence, was that biblical? She asked. When you prioritized loyalty to one man above your oath, was that biblical? He claimed they followed the legal process entirely. Crockett cut him off, stating directly that he was following Trump. You were following a man who lost 63 court cases and was told by his own advisors that he lost. You watched a mob attack the Capitol and did absolutely nothing for 3 hours. You followed him then, and you follow him now. Johnson's hand shook with visible emotion as he stated that he resented the implication. Crockett read a printout of an email he sent on December 14, 2020. You wrote that we must exhaust every legal remedy to ensure Trump's victory because the future of the movement depends on it. Did you write that email, Matt? Johnson stared at the paper in silence, with his silence serving as an answer for the entire room. Crockett repeated the specific phrase, ensure Trump's victory. You did not write ensure election integrity or investigate irregularities. You had decided on the outcome you wanted and sought a legal-sounding path to get there. He argued the email was taken entirely out of context. What specific context makes it acceptable that you decided the election was wrong before seeing any evidence? You organized a legal effort to install your candidate regardless of the voters. He stammered that they had a right to use the legal system to challenge outcomes. She countered that they did not have the right to lie about non-existent evidence. She compared the email to a cheating husband deleting text messages because he knew what he was doing was wrong. The entire room fell silent except for the fast typing of the single reporter. Johnson tried to argue they were straying far from the hearing's actual purpose. Crockett interrupted him to say that oversight is the actual purpose of this hearing. She asked who he was accountable to when he delayed critical aid to Ukraine for months. He claimed his decisions were based on principles, but she asked if they were based on what Trump wanted. Trump said no money for Ukraine until after the election, and you waited until he gave you permission. Is that constitutional originalism or just doing what you are told? Johnson hardened his voice to say, he takes orders only from constituents and his own conscience. She nodded slowly at the mention of the conscience that needs monitoring software to avoid porn. The public gallery erupted in loud laughter. Half the gallery laughed openly as Chairman Comer banged the gavel with emphasis. Johnson turned purple and called it a gross mischaracterization of the software. Crockett asked him if it really was, noting those were his own words about avoiding temptation. She asked if we should trust him to run the entire house unsupervised when he cannot even trust himself with the internet. He argued, it is completely different. From where I sit, it looks like you need someone constantly watching you to do the right thing, whether it is your son or Donald Trump. You seem entirely unable to make good decisions on your own. Johnson slammed his hand onto the table and refused to be lectured to. He stopped himself before saying exactly who he wouldn't be lectured by. Crockett finished the sentence for him by suggesting, by a black woman. Johnson froze because they both knew he was about to say exactly that. Crockett offered to help him, suggesting he won't be lectured by someone who doesn't share his biblical values. The values that say a man needs internet monitoring software but should lead an entire political party. The values that say marriage is sacred for him but negotiable for Donald Trump. Said Johnson whispered to her that she was twisting his words. I am quoting them directly, and that is the problem for you, she retorted. She pulled another document from a 2015 speech he gave at Louisiana College. You said, we will not bend our knee to the false gods of political expediency. You said, we will stand firm on the rock of biblical truth. She called it truly beautiful rhetoric. Which part of biblical truth told you to overturn a fair election or defend a president who bragged about sexual assault? Which part told you to ignore family separation at the border? She stated she is asking about his principles, since he claims faith guides every single decision. From her perspective, his principles look very flexible. They are rigid for others, but flexible as a gymnast for defending Trump. Johnson shook his head and said she didn't understand the concepts. She asked him to explain using very small words for her. He said faith is entirely about grace and forgiveness. She countered that Trump gets grace, but immigrants and women seeking health care do not. Trump gets the benefit of the doubt, but Biden voters get a conspiracy theory. She stated to him, "That is not grace or faith. It is just power." Johnson gripped the table, claiming she was mischaracterizing him. She challenged him to justify defending a president who tried to overthrow a fair election. He denied the attempt, but she listed the fake electors in the mob. She asked him what he calls those actions. He claimed Trump was exercising legal options. She reminded him there were no legal options according to every court and every advisor. Yet you stood by him anyway. She asked if it was because he believed in him or in his own political future, or did you just need someone to watch your voting record like your son watches your history? The direct comparison hit hard, and Johnson's eyes widened. She suggested this is really about him not trusting himself without constant monitoring. Your son monitors your internet, and Trump monitors your loyalty. You try to convince us you are a man of principle, but you are a man who needs to be told what to do. Johnson's voice cracked slightly as he spoke of his public service. He said it is not fair. She retorted that what is not fair is him judging millions while he cannot trust himself with an internet connection. It is not fair to control women's health care while defending a man who paid off a porn star. It is not fair to wrap yourself in the Constitution while helping Trump shred it. Johnson was breathing hard and denied undermining the Constitution. She asked what he calls January 6th. He called it a dark day
Favor of
he
an open
condemned
border,
at the
and
time.
I'm asking
She
you
produced
honestly in
the
good
amicus
faith.
brief arguing to throw out results in
What is the
states
purpose
Biden
of
The
what
gentleman
I
yield?
would love to hear
She
your
asked if he
explanation.
made the same argument
When
about
I say
states
that
Trump
you
won.
are the least qualified
He did not
FBI
answer, so she
director
took
in
it
the
as a
history
no.
of the FBI, that is
You
real,
only thought
because
elections
you are the
were
only one that never
unconstitutional when
even
Trump
served
lost.
with the FBI
Do you see
prior
the
to
actual problem
joining,
here? She
yet
asked
we
him. Johnson
Not
claimed they
complaining,
had
just
legitimate
explaining
concerns
why
about the
we're all a
election.
little bit haggard.
She
But I tell
stated
you
he
what's
had
the issue
zero
that's really
evidence
got
and
us
only a
worn
desire
out.
to keep Trump in
And I
power.
just genuinely wanted to
You
ask
were
a
willing
question
to
of my
ignore your
colleagues here, because
official
both
oath,
of you are
which
here
you
in good
said was
faith, and
before
I
God.
respect you as individuals.
to tell
He
you
claimed he
bye-bye.
never
I know
ignored
that
his
you
oath.
got a little upset.
She insisted
and
he
you put
tried to
on your
overturn
show
a
for
fair
your boss,
election
'cause it
using
seems
a
like you're
made-up
trying
legal
to
process.
save your job,
She
when
pointed
it
out he
came
voted to object to
talking
electoral
Senator
votes
Booker
even after
yesterday.
5 people had
But let's
died.
go through some
She
of
brought up the
your
specific
failures.
biblical value of bearing false witness, because that is what he did. You told millions the election was stolen when you knew it wasn't. You told them the system was rigged, and when they believed you and attacked the Capitol, you condemned the violence but not the lie. He denied encouraging any violence. She argued he encouraged the exact belief that led to it. She accused him of still spreading lies and putting party over country while claiming to be a man of faith. Johnson mumbled that his faith is strictly between him and God. She countered him by stating, "It is not when he uses it to legislate and to defend Trump. You made your faith political, so now you must answer for it." The entire room fell completely silent. She asked one more very direct question, requiring a simple yes or no answer. Johnson looked like a man awaiting his execution. If a female constituent came to you saying her husband cheated and paid women to keep quiet, would you tell her to stay? If he lied under oath and was convicted of fraud, would you tell her to honor her covenant? Yet Johnson widened his eyes and said, "It depends on the specific circumstances." She demanded a simple yes or no. He said he would counsel her to pray and to seek guidance. She pressed him if he would tell her to stay with the cheater. He admitted he would tell her that marriage is sacred. She concluded he would tell her to stay. He added, "Forgiveness is always possible." You wouldn't tell her she deserves better or has a right to walk away from the relationship. You believe in the sanctity of marriage, but not the sanctity of the vote or the Constitution. Your beliefs only apply when they help you. When they mean standing up to Trump, suddenly there is context. Johnson cracked and said that is not true. Prove it by admitting the election wasn't stolen right now. Ensuing silence was deafening to the ears. Johnson claimed there were irregularities deserving investigation. She demanded he say Joe Biden won fair and square. He said the American people deserve their concerns addressed. You still cannot say it even now. You would rather lie under oath than admit Trump lost. He shook his head, saying he isn't lying to her. She asked for 3 words. Biden won legitimately. Johnson pressed his lips together, refusing to say the words. That is what I thought. I actually believe you need accountability software because you cannot be trusted. Maybe your son should sit here so we might get an honest answer. A shocked laugh burst from the gallery. Johnson stood up abruptly, saying he doesn't have to be insulted in this chamber. Sit down because you have 4 minutes of my time left. Johnson sank back into his chair, looking completely deflated. She told him the saddest part is he believes his own lies. You tell yourself you defend biblical values and the Constitution, so you cannot see what we see. We see a man who talks about covenants while defending an adulterer. We see a man who talks about the Constitution while trying to overthrow a fair election. We see a man who needs software to avoid porn lecturing women on morality. We see a man who breaks his oaths when they are inconvenient for him. Johnson bowed his head low. We do not see a man of principle or a man of faith. We see a follower desperate for power who will betray any principle to stay in Trump's good graces. She aligned her papers and said she understands now. You are not accountable to God, but to Trump and the MAGA base. That is why you need monitoring software left to your own devices. You will do whatever keeps you in power. Johnson stared at the table in silence. Crockett stated she had no further questions. Chairman Comer asked if Representative Jordan had questions. Jordan said no. Johnson gathered his papers with trembling hands and dropped a pen. He walked toward the door like a man in a nightmare. A whisper in the gallery asked if he ever answered the question. Crockett stopped him at the door. She asked if he would tell his son what happened here when they run their accountability software tonight. Will you tell him about the questions you couldn't answer, or will you delete this too? Johnson left without a single word. Crockett sat back as applause started in the gallery. It sounded like relief. Crockett did not smile but gathered her papers. Her job was done because the truth was out there. When Johnson talks about values, people will remember his silence. They will remember he has no principles, only positions that change based on power. That is why he needs accountability software. He has spent so long on quicksand he forgot what bedrock feels like. The clips would go viral, especially his silence on whether Biden won. Crockett thought about the people told their values didn't matter. She thought about those gaslit by leaders. Today the mask slipped and everyone saw the man underneath. You cannot unring that bell. We watched it happen, and the question is what we do about it.